I want you to picture something before I tell you why my life changed forever. Picture one of those thin hospital gowns that never seems to close all the way in the back, no matter how tightly you tie the strings. Picture the cold air of a surgical floor where every hallway smells faintly of antiseptic and fresh coffee from the nurse's station. Picture N4 taped to your arm while clear saline drips into your veins one slow drop at a time. Now picture a clock hanging on the wall directly across from your bed, every second feeling like an entire minute because you know that in less than an hour, your body will never be the same again. That was exactly where I was. 40 minutes away from giving my husband one of my kidneys. I had already signed every document they placed in front of me. Every consent form. Every medical waiver. Every page explaining the risks, the pain, the recovery, and the possibility that something could go wrong. I signed them all without hesitation. For 18 months, my entire life had revolved around one goal: keeping Marcus alive. When the doctors first told us his kidneys were failing, I didn't think in terms of percentages or medical charts. I only heard one thing. My husband was dying. Everything after that became secondary. Weekend trips disappeared. Date nights disappeared. Vacations disappeared. Instead, our calendar became a collection of dialysis appointments, blood tests, consultations, medication schedules, and endless visits to specialists. Our marriage slowly transformed from husband and wife into caregiver and patient. I never complained. Not once. Because that's what love is supposed to do. At least that's what I believed. The nurses had left the curtain between our beds partially open so we could talk while waiting for surgery. Marcus looked over at me and smiled, but it wasn't the smile I had fallen in love with 14 years earlier. Kidney disease changes people. It steals weight first. Then strength. Then color. Finally, it steals hope. The man lying beside me looked nothing like the confident contractor who once carried lumber on his shoulders like it weighed nothing. His face looked thinner. His hands trembled slightly every time he reached for his cup. Even his voice had become softer over the last year. "You scared?" he asked quietly. I laughed, even though my stomach felt tied into knots. Terrified. He reached across the small gap separating our beds and squeezed my fingers. "Everything's going to be different after today." I nodded. "I know. 4 months we'd been talking about life after the transplant. The trips we'd finally take. The little porch he'd always promised to build behind our house. Morning coffee together without dialysis appointments interrupting our schedule. Maybe even adopting a child one day. For the first time in almost 2 years, the future felt possible again. I remember staring at him and thinking every scar from surgery would be worth it if it meant watching him grow old beside me. Some people asked whether I was afraid of donating a kidney. Of course I was. I was terrified. But fear seemed like such a small price compared to losing the man I'd spent more than a decade loving. Marcus smiled again. "When I'm better," he said, "I'm finally building that porch." I rolled my eyes. "The doctors already told you that you won't be lifting anything heavy for months." "I'll supervise." "You'll complain." "I'll supervise while complaining." That made me laugh. For just a few seconds, everything felt normal again. Like before the hospitals. Before the medications. Before every conversation revolved around lab results and blood pressure readings. Before our entire marriage became measured in doctor's appointments. Those few seconds felt like stepping back into our old life. I wanted to freeze them forever. Then his phone vibrated. Just once. A quick buzz against the plastic tray beside his hospital bed. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention. People receive messages all the time. Especially before surgery. Family members. Friends. Co-workers. But something happened that I still can't fully explain. Some quiet instinct buried deep inside me suddenly woke up. Marcus moved faster than I'd seen him move in months. His hand shot toward the phone almost desperately. Not casually. Not naturally. Desperately. As though grabbing that phone mattered more than anything else happening in the room. His thumb reached the screen just a fraction too late. Because I saw it. Only 3 letters. And a tiny red heart. Celine Redheart. I frowned. The name meant absolutely nothing to me. In 11 years of marriage, I had never heard Marcus mention anyone named Celine. Not once. No co-worker. No family friend. No client. No neighbor. No cousin. Nobody. Yet there it was. Displayed on the screen with a heart beside her name. I looked at Marcus. Who's Celine? The question came out gently. Almost casually. I wasn't accusing him. I genuinely expected a simple explanation. Maybe a nurse. Maybe someone from physical therapy. Maybe a cousin whose name I'd forgotten. Marcus didn't look at me. He flipped the phone face down. Nobody. Nobody? Just work. Work. At 7:15 in the morning. On the day of his transplant surgery. Inside a hospital. The answer didn't fit. Not because it was impossible. Because it felt rehearsed. Too quick. Too automatic. He finally looked at me, but only for a second before looking away again. I noticed something I'd never seen on his face before. Not fear of surgery. Not fear of dying. Fear of being caught. A strange silence settled between us. The heart monitors continued their steady rhythm. Nurses walked past our room. Someone laughed somewhere down the hallway. Life continued exactly as before. Yet everything inside me had changed. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. You're nervous. You're exhausted. You've barely slept in days. Don't create problems where none exist. But another part of me, the part that had quietly noticed little changes over the past several months without fully understanding them, refused to let it go. Why had he hidden the screen? Why did he answer so quickly? Why had I never heard that name before? Most importantly, why did one simple text message suddenly make the strongest marriage I thought I had ever known feel strangely unfamiliar? I didn't know it yet. But that tiny phone vibration, those 3 letters, and one little red heart had just started a chain of events that would destroy everything I believed about my husband, my marriage, and the sacrifice I was only 40 minutes away from making. 18 months before that morning in the hospital, my life was beautifully ordinary. At the time, I didn't appreciate how precious ordinary really was. Marcus and I had been married for 11 years, together for 14. We weren't one of those couples constantly posting anniversary pictures online or trying to convince the world that our relationship was perfect. We simply lived our lives the best we knew how. We laughed more than we argued. We finished each other's sentences. We knew exactly how the other took their coffee. If someone had asked me then to describe my marriage in one word, I would have said, safe. Marcus made the world feel safe. I first met him on a warm September afternoon at my sister Toya's house. A storm had damaged part of her back porch, and Marcus was the contractor sent by the insurance company to inspect the repairs. He had sawdust on his boots, a tape measure hanging from his belt, and a pencil tucked behind one ear. Nothing about him looked extraordinary. Until he smiled. It was one of those smiles that instantly made you feel like you'd known someone for years. I walked outside carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea because my mother had raised us to never let someone work outside in Texas heat without offering them something cold to drink. "You look like you could use this," I said. He accepted the glass with a grin. "Thank you." Our fingers brushed for barely a second. It sounds ridiculous now, but I remember feeling something spark inside me that afternoon. Not fireworks. Not some magical movie moment. Just comfort. Real comfort. The kind that quietly whispers, "Pay attention to this person." He stayed far longer than necessary that afternoon, asking questions about my graduate program, my family, and my plans for the future. By sunset, I had his phone number written on the back of an old church bulletin tucked inside my purse. 6 months later, we were inseparable. A year after that, he proposed in the parking lot of a tiny barbecue restaurant because he couldn't wait until dessert. Rain poured around us while he stood there completely soaked, holding a ring he admitted he could barely afford. "I don't have much," he told me. "My truck has over 200,000 miles on it, and my business could fail next year. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you." I said yes before he finished speaking. Those early years weren't easy. Money disappeared almost as quickly as we earned it. Marcus started his contracting business twice before it finally became successful. I worked as a substitute teacher while finishing graduate school and picked up weekend shifts tutoring children just to keep our bills paid. Some months we counted quarters before filling the gas tank. There were weeks when dinner was nothing more than rice, beans, and whatever vegetables happened to be on sale. Instead of feeling embarrassed, we'd joke about inventing new recipes. We laughed through almost everything. One summer our air conditioner completely stopped working. Rather than complain, Marcus dragged our mattress into the living room, set up 2 box fans, and declared it our indoor camping adventure. We spent the night eating melting popsicles and laughing until our neighbors knocked on the wall. One day, Marcus said while staring at the stained ceiling above us, "I'm building you a house with the biggest porch in Texas. You keep making promises. And I keep planning to keep them." That became our dream. The porch. It wasn't really about the porch. It represented stability. A future. Growing old together. Life wasn't perfect. In our 4th year of marriage, we lost a baby. Far enough along that we'd already picked a name. Far enough that we'd imagined birthdays, Christmas mornings, first days of school, and bedtime stories. Losing the child changed something inside both of us. We never truly talked about it. Instead, we quietly carried the grief together. Some couples fall apart after tragedy. Some become stronger. I believed we had become stronger. Marcus became more protective. I became more patient. Without realizing it, we learned how to love each other through silence as much as conversation. Friends often told us they admired our marriage. Whenever we hosted cookouts, Marcus somehow always noticed when my drink was empty before I did. He'd refill it without asking. If I had a stressful week at work, he'd cook dinner. If he came home exhausted after working construction all day, I'd rub his shoulders while we watched television. We weren't trying to impress each other anymore. We simply cared. Looking back now, I realize love isn't measured by grand romantic gestures. It's measured by tiny daily choices repeated thousands of times. Then everything changed. Marcus started getting tired. At first, we blamed work. Construction is demanding. Anyone would be exhausted after 12-hour days in Texas heat. But this tiredness felt different. He'd fall asleep sitting upright before dinner. Sometimes he couldn't finish a conversation without rubbing his eyes. Then came the swelling in his ankles. The headaches. The constant nausea. He insisted it was nothing. "I'm just getting older." "You need a doctor," I kept saying. "I'll go next week." Next week became next month. Then another month. Like many stubborn men, Marcus believed ignoring a problem somehow made it smaller. It didn't. The diagnosis arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Stage 4 chronic kidney disease. I'll never forget sitting inside that examination room listening as the nephrologist explained everything using words I barely understood. Kidney function below 15%. Dialysis. Transplant evaluation. Possible donor testing. It all sounded unreal. Marcus stared silently at the floor. I reached for his hand before he even looked up. "We'll get through this." I believed those words with every part of my heart. The next year became a blur of hospitals and treatments. Dialysis 3 mornings every week. blood work, medication adjustments, diet restrictions, fluid restrictions, doctor appointments that seemed endless. Watching someone you love slowly lose strength is one of the cruelest experiences imaginable. Marcus hated depending on people. He hated needing help walking after treatments. He hated watching me pay bills while he slept from exhaustion. Most of all, he hated feeling like less of a husband. When the transplant team finally suggested testing family members for compatibility, I didn't wait for anyone else to volunteer. "Test me first," I said. Marcus immediately shook his head. "No." "Yes." "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't." "I'm serious." "So am I." He tried arguing for nearly an hour. I wouldn't budge. If there was even the smallest chance I could save his life, I wasn't going to let fear stop me. 4 months later, the transplant coordinator called. I was a match. Not just a match. An excellent match. Marcus cried before I did. His mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She kept repeating, "God answered our prayers." I believed that too. Looking back now, I realize something else had quietly begun around the same time. Marcus started mentioning someone from physical therapy. Her name was Celine. At first it sounded completely innocent. "Celine says my mobility is improving. Celine thinks this exercise will strengthen my back. Celine had a patient who recovered faster doing this routine." I barely noticed how often her name entered our conversations. Why would I? She was helping my husband recover. I was grateful she cared. Never once did it occur to me that while I was preparing to give Marcus a piece of my body to save his life, someone else was slowly finding a place inside his heart. And the most heartbreaking part wasn't that the warning signs weren't there. It's that they were. I simply trusted my husband too much to see them for what they really were. The morning of the surgery should have been the happiest morning of our lives. After 18 months of hospital visits, endless dialysis sessions, blood tests, and praying for good news, we had finally reached the finish line. Or at least that's what I believed. The transplant floor was strangely peaceful that morning. Nurses moved quietly between rooms, checking charts and adjusting 4 lines. Every now and then I heard the soft beeping of heart monitors echoing through the hallway. Outside the window, the sun was just beginning to rise over Houston, painting the sky with soft shades of orange. It looked like the beginning of a miracle. Marcus and I were separated by nothing more than a thin hospital curtain. Every few minutes one of us would make a joke, trying to distract the other from what was about to happen. Neither of us wanted to admit how scared we really were. When the nurse finished checking my blood pressure, she smiled warmly. "You two are going to do great." I smiled back. "I hope so." As soon as she left the room, Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand again. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You already have." He looked confused. "By giving me 11 wonderful years." His eyes filled with tears. "I promise, after this, everything changes." "I know." For a few beautiful moments, I believed every word. Then his phone vibrated. One short buzz. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just enough to pull his attention away from me. His reaction, however, was anything but ordinary. Marcus lunged toward the phone almost instinctively. His movements were too fast. Too nervous. Almost desperate. By the time he flipped the screen over, I'd already seen it. Celine Redheart. 3 letters. 1 tiny heart. That was all. "Who's Celine?" I asked. I expected him to laugh. Maybe explain she was a nurse. Maybe someone from physical therapy. Maybe even a cousin I had forgotten about. Instead, he froze. Only for a second. But sometimes 1 second tells you everything. Nobody. Nobody? Just work. His answer came too quickly. Almost automatically. Work. At 7:15 in the morning. On transplant day. While lying in a hospital bed. The explanation didn't make sense. I stared at him. He refused to meet my eyes. For the first time in 14 years, my husband looked like a stranger. I wanted to keep asking questions. I wanted to demand the truth. Instead, I convinced myself that surgery nerves were making me paranoid. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe I was simply terrified about what was about to happen. The human mind is remarkable at protecting itself from painful truths. Sometimes we don't ignore warning signs because we don't see them. Sometimes we ignore them because seeing them would destroy the future we've spent years building. The nurse returned a few minutes later to prepare us for surgery. The conversation ended. Or so I thought. Around 20 minutes later, another nurse came to adjust my four. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a call. His hands were occupied. One held a cup of ice chips. The other was connected to medical equipment. Without thinking, I reached for the phone. I've got it. Marcus's face changed instantly. His eyes widened. Adrian, don't. I had already picked it up. The screen lit up. Celine Redheart. Before Marcus could stop me, I answered. Hello? Silence. Just a single breath on the other end. Then a woman's voice spoke softly. Hey, it's me. She sounded comfortable. Relaxed. Intimate. The kind of voice reserved for someone who believed she belonged. I just wanted to check on you before they take you back. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. She continued talking. I know you're probably nervous, but once today is over, everything gets easier. My heart started pounding. We won't have to hide anymore. Hide? I still didn't say a word. I wanted her to keep talking. Sometimes the truth reveals itself when people think no one is listening. I've been thinking about us all week, she continued. 8 months is a long time to keep pretending. 8 months. The words echoed inside my head. 8 months. While I was driving Marcus to dialysis. While I was working extra tutoring jobs to help pay medical bills. While I was sitting through compatibility testing. While I was preparing to give him my kidney. He had been having an affair. For 8 months. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Every heartbeat sounded louder than the hospital monitors surrounding us. Finally I spoke. Celine. Complete silence. This is Adrian. Nothing. I'm Marcus's wife. Another long pause. The wife you've been hiding from. The line disconnected immediately. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. I slowly lowered the phone onto the bedside table. Marcus hadn't said a single word. His face had turned completely pale. He looked terrified. Not because of surgery. Because his secret no longer existed. I looked directly into his eyes. My voice sounded strangely calm. Were you ever planning to tell me? He stared at the blanket. No answer. Were you going to let me give you my kidney first? Still nothing. That silence hurt more than any confession ever could. Finally he whispered my name. Adrian. I interrupted him. Don't. He buried his face in his hands. I was going to end it. When? After the surgery. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because my heart couldn't process the cruelty any other way. So your plan was to let me save your life. He remained silent. Accept my kidney. He closed his eyes. Recover from surgery. Tears rolled down his face. And then pretend none of this ever happened? I was ashamed. No. I shook my head slowly. You were selfish. I never stopped loving you. Then why? He struggled to answer. Words seemed impossible. Finally he whispered, I was scared. Scared of what? Scared of dying. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. Every day I felt weaker. I felt broken. I felt useless. When I was with her, she didn't treat me like I was sick. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I drove you to dialysis before sunrise. He looked away. I sat beside you during every appointment. Silence. I picked up extra work to pay your medical bills. Still silence. I volunteered to lose an organ so you could keep living. Tears filled my eyes. And somehow, you thought I made you feel broken? He had no answer. Because there wasn't one. A knock interrupted us. The transplant coordinator entered the room with a clipboard. Good morning. We'll be taking both of you back in about 20 minutes. She immediately sensed something was wrong. Neither of us spoke. She quietly excused herself, promising to return shortly. The moment the curtain closed again, I realized something that changed my life forever. The biggest betrayal wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lies. It was the fact that Marcus had been willing to let me sacrifice a piece of my own body while hiding the truth from me. He had planned to accept the greatest gift I could ever give another human being while secretly believing I never deserved the truth. At that moment, lying in a hospital gown only minutes away from surgery, I understood something I had never truly understood before. Love without honesty isn't love at all. And no sacrifice, no matter how great, should ever be built on a foundation of deception. I sat there staring at Marcus, waiting for him to say something that could somehow make the last 10 minutes disappear. Something that would explain away the phone call. Something that would convince me I had misunderstood. Instead, all I heard was silence. Not the peaceful silence that had existed between us for years, the comfortable kind where words weren't necessary. This silence was different. Heavy. Cold. Final. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the blanket covering his legs. His hands trembled slightly, but I couldn't tell whether it was from kidney disease or fear. Maybe both. Finally, he whispered my name. Adrian. I looked at him without saying a word. I never meant for you to find out like this. The sentence hit me harder than the affair itself. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't. He wasn't apologizing for betraying me. He was apologizing for getting caught. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my emotions under control. So when exactly were you planning to tell me? He swallowed hard. I wasn't. The honesty was almost cruel. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought after the transplant I'd end things with Celine. And then? I'd focus on us. I stared at him in disbelief. You actually believed you could erase 8 months of lies just because you decided to stop lying? I was trying to protect you. I almost laughed. No. I shook my head. You were protecting yourself. His shoulders slumped. I know. No, Marcus. I leaned forward. I don't think you do. You were going to let me risk my life. You were going to let surgeons remove part of my body. You were going to let me spend months recovering. And every single day while I was healing. My voice finally broke. You would have looked me in the eyes knowing I'd sacrificed everything for a husband who had already betrayed me. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I hate myself. For a brief second, I almost reached for his hand. Habit. 11 years of habit. But I stopped myself. Some gestures no longer belonged to us. A gentle knock interrupted the room. Dr. Anand stepped inside. She was calm, professional, and kind, exactly as she'd been throughout the transplant process. She immediately sensed something had changed. Doctors become experts at reading rooms. She looked from Marcus to me and quietly closed the curtain behind her.
"Everything okay?" Neither of us answered. She looked at Marcus, then back at me. Finally she asked softly, "Adrian?" I took a deep breath. "I can't do the surgery."
The room became completely still. Marcus immediately looked up.
"No."
His voice was desperate.
"Please." Dr. Anand didn't react. She simply waited. "I need to understand what's happened." I looked at Marcus one final time before answering. "My husband has been having an affair."
For the first time since we'd met her, Dr. Anand looked genuinely surprised.
She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply listened. "I found out less than 15 minutes ago." Another long silence filled the room.
Marcus buried his face in his hands.
"I'm sorry." He repeated it over and over. "I'm so sorry." Dr. Anand slowly nodded. "Adrian."
Her voice remained gentle.
"I need you to understand something.
If you withdraw as a donor today, Marcus will remain on dialysis."
"I know. There is no guarantee another donor will become available quickly." "I understand. He could wait months." "I understand."
"There are risks."
"I know."
She studied my face carefully.
"I am not trying to pressure you. I would never do that.
My responsibility is simply to make sure you fully understand the medical consequences before making your decision."
I appreciated her honesty. Everyone else in that room had an opinion. She offered only facts.
For a long moment, I stared at the 4 taped into my arm.
Only an hour earlier I had looked at it with pride.
Now it felt like a chain connecting me to someone I no longer recognized.
Marcus finally stood up despite the nurse's instructions to remain seated. He looked weaker than I'd ever seen him. Not physically. Emotionally.
He slowly walked toward me. "I know I don't deserve another chance." I remained silent. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness."
Still nothing. "But please."
His voice cracked completely.
"I don't want to die."
The words pierced my heart.
Because despite everything, I still loved him. Not the man who had lied. The man I believed he used to be. The man who proposed to me in the rain.
The man who carried groceries inside before carrying his own tools. The man who once stayed awake all night after my miscarriage because he was afraid I'd wake up crying. I loved that version of Marcus.
Maybe I always would. And that's what made this decision unbearable. People imagine betrayal instantly destroys love. Sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes love remains.
It simply loses the ability to survive.
I looked directly into his eyes.
"I don't want you to die either." Hope appeared on his face. "But that doesn't mean I can save you."
His expression collapsed.
"I can't separate your life from what you just did. I've tried. I've been sitting here trying. I can't."
Tears streamed down both our faces.
"I still care about you. I probably always will. But every time I imagine waking up after surgery."
I pressed my hand against my chest. I picture myself lying in bed wondering whether the man recovering in the next room actually deserved what I gave him. I would spend the rest of my life questioning my own sacrifice.
And I can't live like that. Marcus slowly nodded. Almost as if he already knew. Dr. Anand quietly stepped outside to give us privacy. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm. Nurses walked past outside. Somewhere down the hallway another family celebrated successful surgery. Life continued.
Ours had stopped.
Eventually, I reached toward the tape securing my fore. The physical pain barely registered. Compared to everything else, it was nothing. I slowly changed back into my own clothes. Folding the hospital gown felt strangely symbolic. Just 30 minutes earlier it represented hope. Now it represented the moment my marriage ended. Marcus watched quietly from his bed. I'll regret this forever. I know. I never stopped loving you. I looked at him for a long time. I believe you. His eyes widened. You do? Yes. I believe you loved me. Then why? I interrupted him gently. But love without loyalty isn't enough. Love without honesty isn't enough. Love without respect isn't enough. He lowered his head. I understand. I don't think you do. I picked up my purse. You wanted me to sacrifice a kidney because you believed our marriage was worth saving. I paused at the doorway. The tragedy isn't that I refused. The tragedy is that you destroyed the marriage before either of us ever walked into this hospital. He closed his eyes. I'll never forgive myself. I nodded slowly. That's something you'll have to live with. As I walked down the hallway, every step felt heavier than the last. Patients passed me in wheelchairs. Families waited anxiously outside operating rooms. Doctors hurried between elevators carrying charts. No one knew that a woman had just walked away from donating an organ to the man she loved. No one knew she wasn't walking away because she had stopped caring whether he lived. She was walking away because, for the first time in 11 years, she had finally chosen to save herself too. I wish I could tell you that walking out of the hospital made everything easier. It didn't. The moment the automatic doors closed behind me, reality hit like a freight train. For 18 months, every morning had started with one purpose: keeping Marcus alive. Now, for the first time in years, I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. I sat inside my car for almost an hour without turning the engine on. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls from family. Messages from friends. Voicemails from relatives who knew surgery was scheduled for that morning. No one knew it had never happened. No one knew that while other couples were fighting to survive disease, ours had collapsed because of betrayal. Eventually, I drove to my sister Toya's house. She opened the front door before I even knocked. The second she saw me standing there in the same clothes I'd worn to the hospital that morning, she knew something was terribly wrong. What happened? I couldn't answer. I simply hugged her. And for the first time since hearing Celine's voice, I cried. Not quietly. Not gracefully. I completely fell apart. Toya didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. She just held me until I finally had enough strength to breathe again. Over the next several weeks, I moved into her guest room. Everything I owned fit inside 2 suitcases and one cardboard box filled with medical paperwork I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Every morning I woke up forgetting where I was. Then I'd remember. The affair. The hospital. The phone call. The surgery that never happened. Every memory arrived all over again. Marcus texted constantly. I'm sorry. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please let me explain. I love you. Sometimes he'd send 6 or 7 messages in one day. I never replied. Not because I hated him. Because I didn't trust myself. Part of me still wanted to run back. Part of me still remembered the man I'd fallen in love with. Healing isn't as simple as people imagine. Your heart doesn't erase years of love simply because your mind discovers betrayal. His mother, Odessa, called almost every day. Each conversation broke my heart in a different way. I don't know how to love my son today, she admitted one afternoon through tears. I raised him better than this. I know. I hate what he did. I know. But I'm terrified of losing him too. I closed my eyes. You don't have to choose between loving your son and loving me. I already lost my husband. You shouldn't have to lose your child too. She cried even harder. I'm so sorry. So am I. Marcus continued dialysis.
His health worsened.
Every update came through Odessa because I still couldn't bring myself to see him.
There were days when guilt tried convincing me I'd made the wrong decision.
What if he died? Would I blame myself forever? Then I'd remember that phone call. We won't have to hide anymore.
Those words reminded me why I walked away.
Saving someone's life should never require sacrificing your own self-respect. About a month later, my best friend Renata came over carrying takeout and her laptop. I found something. I looked at her. What?
I started looking into Celine.
I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But curiosity eventually won. Renata turned the screen toward me.
She had found discussions from healthcare workers in the area.
Nothing officially documented. Nothing that could be proven in court. But enough to reveal a disturbing pattern.
Apparently, another rehabilitation clinic had quietly dismissed Celine after complaints involving inappropriate relationships with vulnerable male patients recovering from major medical procedures.
No criminal charges. No public scandal. Just whispers. Stories. Warnings. Renata looked at me carefully.
I don't think Marcus was her first. I stared at the screen without speaking.
For months I'd imagined some great love story between them. Two people hopelessly in love.
Instead, it looked like something much darker. She seemed drawn toward men during the weakest moments of their lives. Men who felt broken.
Men desperate for validation. It didn't excuse Marcus. Nothing ever could.
But it helped me understand something important.
Their relationship hadn't been built on genuine love.
It had been built on vulnerability.
Not long afterward, Odessa called again. Celine disappeared. What do you mean? She quit the clinic. No notice. No explanation.
Nobody knows where she went. I sat quietly for a long time after hanging up. The woman Marcus risked everything for had vanished almost as quickly as she'd appeared.
She wasn't waiting beside his hospital bed. She wasn't driving him to dialysis.
She wasn't helping him through recovery. She simply disappeared. The fantasy ended the moment real life became difficult. A few weeks later, another call came from Odessa. This time her voice sounded different.
Hopeful. They found a donor. I froze. A donor? Someone on the National Registry. A perfect match. They're scheduling surgery.
For the first time in months, I cried tears of relief.
Not because we were getting back together. Because no matter how much he'd hurt me, I never wanted him to die. His transplant was successful. The surgery went well.
Recovery was difficult, but his new kidney functioned beautifully. Life had given him another chance.
It simply wasn't my kidney that saved him.
Nearly 2 months later, Marcus asked if we could meet one final time. After thinking about it for several days, I agreed. Not to rebuild our marriage. To finish it properly.
We met at a quiet coffee shop neither of us had ever visited before.
He looked healthier. Color had returned to his face.
The swelling was gone.
Physically, he looked like the man I'd spent years praying would recover. Emotionally, he looked exhausted. He stared into his coffee for a long time before speaking.
I've tried every day to understand why I did what I did. I waited. I think being sick made me feel invisible. He looked up.
Celine made me forget I was a patient.
I know that isn't an excuse. It isn't. I know. He nodded. You deserved honesty. More than anything.
I smiled sadly.
You know what hurts the most? What? I never made you carry your illness alone. I was there every single day. I wasn't competing with another woman. I was standing beside my husband.
His eyes filled with tears.
I know.
If you had told me you were scared,
I would have stayed.
if you had told me you felt broken,
I would have listened. You didn't lose me because you got sick. You lost me because you stopped telling me the truth. Neither of us spoke for several minutes.
Finally, he asked the question we both knew was coming.
Will you ever forgive me? I thought carefully before answering. I already have. Hope briefly returned to his face.
But forgiveness isn't the same thing as trust. His smile disappeared. And forgiveness isn't the same thing as getting another chance.
I can forgive what happened. I just can't build another marriage on top of it. He slowly nodded. I understand. I hope one day you forgive yourself too. We stood. He quietly whispered goodbye. This time, it really was goodbye.
Today, I live in a small apartment with a narrow balcony instead of the large porch Marcus once promised to build. I bought 2 rocking chairs anyway.
Not because I'm still waiting for him. Because some dreams deserve to survive even when the people attached to them don't. Sometimes I sit outside in the evenings, watching thunderstorms roll across the Texas sky.
Years ago, I believed love meant sacrificing everything for another person.
Now I understand something very different. Love is beautiful. Sacrifice can be beautiful too. But neither should ever require abandoning your own dignity. Walking away from that operating room wasn't the hardest decision I've ever made. Living with it afterward was.
Yet if I were somehow taken back to that hospital bed, 40 minutes before surgery, hearing that same phone call all over again,
I would still walk away. Because saving someone else's life should never cost you your own sense of worth.
And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't staying.
Sometimes, the bravest thing they can do is finally choose themselves.